As soon as I sat on the board, a wave was coming at me. I probably took all the energy I had left in the world at that moment, and I don't know why. I spun my board around and I pedaled twice and I popped to my feet. I popped up to an entirely different state of consciousness. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before, but it was downright mystical. I felt like I could see out of the back of my head, panoramic vision. I was having an out-of-body experience. Best of all, I felt great. I felt great.
Let's go.
Welcome back to another episode of This Magic Life. I'm your host, Andrea Koppel. Today, we are diving deep into the fascinating interplay of serendipity, magic, and the unpredictability of our career journeys with none other than Steven Kotler. Steven is a New York Times bestselling author and award-winning journalist and the executive director of the Flow Research Collective. He is one of the world's leading experts on human performance, and he's also the author of 11 bestsellers, and that is out of a total of 14 books. His work has been nominated for 3 Pulitzer Prizes, translated into over 50 languages, and has appeared in over 110 publications, including academic journals such as Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews and Psychophysiology, and mainstream publications like the New York Times Magazine. You can also learn more about Flow just by tuning in to his podcast on the Flow Collective Radio. So whether you're just starting out or you're farther along your professional path, today's conversation promises to connect the dots between how embracing the unpredictability of life and tuning into flow can open doors for you to incredible opportunities. Steven, welcome to This Magic Life. I want to begin by asking you to define flow and how a former creative writing major, someone who studied the humanities, became so fascinated with neuroscience and eventually an expert in human performance.
Thank you. It's nice to be with you. That was a lovely introduction. Appreciate it. And let's start with the question of a definition. Let me back up one step and talk about peak performance first, and then put flow in the context of peak performance. Peak performance is it's a fancy term, but it doesn't really mean anything more than getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. All humans are hardwired for peak performance, to perform at our best. At the center of that biology, at the center of that hardwiring, is the state of consciousness known as flow. It's technically defined as an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best, we perform our best. More specifically, the experience that we're all really familiar with is you get so focused on the task at hand, on what you're doing, that everything else just starts to melt away and disappear. Your sense of self, self-consciousness, that nagging voice in your head gets really quiet. Time passes strangely. Most commonly, you just get so sucked into what you're doing that, 2 hours go by in what feels like 2 minutes. And throughout all aspects of performance, mental, physical, and emotional, go through the roof. So that's sort of the shorthand version of flow.
Great. Thank you so much. A little bit later in this interview, I'm going to want to ask you to kind of share your favorite hacks for how students can get into flow, frankly, anyone, but students to achieve their peak performance in their studies and then in their post-grad careers. But of course, this is advice that is relevant to all of us. Almost 20 years ago, Steven, you wrote this amazing book, which was not one of the ones that I listed off. It should be a bestseller, and I would love to help make it a bestseller because it is so fucking amazing. West of Jesus. And it's fun, it's fascinating, but really one of the threads that runs through the book is how you end up kind of healing yourself from Lyme disease and discovering flow in the process. And it's actually, just to kind of tie it into this magic life, the brain is, as you write, just a massive pattern recognition machine. And it's how I landed on wanting to create this show in the first place, because after I interviewed you a few years ago and hundreds of other people in my last podcast, I saw one of the commonalities was the role of serendipity, the role of synchronicities, the role of magic in how our careers unfold. And sometimes the things that happen in our lives are exquisite, pleasurable, like catching an amazing wave in Bali or Mexico, as you've done, hitting the sweet spot of that wave. And at other times, the things that happen to us are unbelievably painful. They suck, like getting sick with Lyme disease, which happened to you for 2 years. But in all cases, whether it's the amazing fairy dust or the shitty black magic, they lead us in directions in our careers that we never could have predicted. So, how did the combination of getting Lyme disease, Stephen, and getting back into surfing do that for you?
Two-part story. I'll tell the first part very quickly. I spent my 20s doing a lot of stuff, but I was working as a journalist. I covered neuroscience and sort of the birth of a lot of the sort of the work that I do today sort of came out of that period. I was covering action sports, and action sports in the 90s is known as an era of impossible, more impossible feats, things we never thought were going to be done, and got done than ever before. And I'll just give you a random one simple example. We're not going to linger here, but since West of Jesus is a little bit about surfing, we're going to come back to surfing. I'll give you a surfing example. Surfing is a really old sport. It dates back to the 4th century AD. And from then to 1996, the biggest wave anybody had ever surfed is 25 feet high. And there are physics papers written about how a surfer paddling away on their chest can't pull into a wave that's bigger than 25 feet. There are other papers saying you can't take the force of impact on a wave that's bigger than that. And so for 1,000 years, that's where the mark has stopped. And today, it's less than 20 years later, surfers routinely pull into waves and paddle into waves that are 80, 90, 100. I think the record is now closing in 120 feet. This is nearly exponential growth in ultimate human performance. At the upper end of the spectrum, we were seeing incredible performance. And it wasn't just surfing, it was all these action sports. And I was in these communities. These were my friends. I was witnessing this, and it was amazing. And we kept wanting to know what's going on, what's happening. And they were telling me stories about their experiences, and we're all going to park that and go to the story that you asked me to tell. So I'm 30 years old. And it's worth pointing out that I spent 10 years sort of getting my dream job. I finally had my dream job, my dream girlfriend, my dream house. I'm set. I think I got everything. And I get Lyme disease. And I spent 3 years in bed. And I'm very sick. I'm one of the first recorded cases in California. So nobody knows what the hell is wrong with me. And after 3 years, I'm functionless. I can't walk across a room. I can use my brain maybe 10% of the time. There was long stretches where I could focus for 20 minutes to an hour a day, and then everything else was gone. My short-term memory is gone. My long-term memory is gone. In fact, to put not too fine of an emphasis on this, it turns out I discovered a couple years ago when I moved, I wrote an entire book while I had Lyme disease, and I have no memory of it. I'm sitting in a box over there. It's in a box. It's a complete novel I have. I'm scared to read it. Wrote the whole thing while I have no memory of it. A friend of mine found it in a box while we were moving. He's like, "What is this? Feels like a manuscript." And we opened it up, and I was like, "Oh my God, I wrote a book while I had Lyme disease. I had no memory of it." Anyways, I'm totally functionless after 3 years of this. The doctors had to pull me off medicines. My stomach lining started bleeding out of this really bad reaction. So there's nothing anybody can do for me, and have made an executive decision that I'm going to end my life. I was extremely depressed, and I had been extremely depressed for a really long time, but it was really clear. Nobody knew if I was going to get any better. I couldn't work. I was just a burden to my friends and my family. And so in the middle of this, and it was really like I sort of had my sleeping pills and my bottle of booze, and I had a plan. And a friend of mine, my good friend of mine, Andrea, shows up at my house and demands that we go surfing. And it's the most ridiculous request I've ever heard. I've known Andrea a long time. She's a dear friend, and she's really insistent. She will not take no. And an hour goes, I can't walk across the room. Like, forget about going surfing, right? It's a pipe dream, but she knows what kind of mental state I'm in. And now it's been like 5 years since I've surfed also. So like on top of the fact that I've been in bed for 3 years, it was a while before I last surfed again, but she will not leave. And after hours of her badgering, I was like, well, what's the worst that could happen? Right? I'm going to kill myself anyway. Fine. Let's go surfing. Who cares? Right. And they literally, like, her and a friend had to carry me to the car or walk me to the car, really. And they put me in the backseat and they drove me to Sunset Beach in Los Angeles, which is like the wimpiest beginner wave in the universe. They gave me a board the size of a Cadillac, so really easy to surf. And they literally had to kind of carry me out to the break, put me on the board. And it was a tiny day. They were like 2-foot waves. And a wave, as soon as I sat on the board, a wave was coming at me. And I probably took all the energy I had left in the world at that moment. And I don't know why. I spun my board around and I paddled twice and I popped to my feet. And really, I think I popped my feet expecting just to collapse and, collapse completely and like take me home. And instead, I popped up to an entirely different state of consciousness that was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. It was very similar to stories I was hearing out of the action sports community about experiences they were having, but it was downright mystical. I felt like I could see out of the back of my head, panoramic vision. I was having an out-of-body experience, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of really merging with the ocean, this oneness with everything that I was feeling with the ocean. And best of all, like, I felt great. Like, I felt great. The pain was gone for the first time in years. My mood was amazing. I was ebullient. I was joyous. I felt amazing. And it felt so good. I caught 4 more waves that day. And by the 5th wave, I was disassembled. I was done. They brought me home. They put me into bed. And they had to bring food to my bed because I couldn't get out of my bed. I was so sick. And I couldn't go to my kitchen, which was like 40 feet away. So I had people had to feed me for like 2 weeks. And on the 15th day, which is the day I could walk again, I had a neighbor who was a former pro surfer. And I walked down the hallway and I knocked at his door and I said, can you take me to the beach? I didn't even know the guy. And he took me to the beach. And I had the exact same sort of wild experience. Felt great. Was totally done by the time I came home. And this became a pattern. The only thing I would do was like lie on the couch and moan. And every couple of days I would go surfing. And over about 6 months, I went from 10% functional to about 80% functional. And what the hell is going on, right? Honest question. Surfing is not known as a cure for chronic autoimmune conditions, first off. Secondly, Lyme is only fatal if it gets into your brain. Now, I'm a science guy. I do neurobiological research. I'm, somewhat of a rational materialist, and I don't tend to have mystical experiences. And in fact, I spent time in monasteries and did a lot of psychedelics. And like I did all that stuff looking for spiritual experiences. None of that stuff ever happened to me. And suddenly they're happening to me while I'm surfing. And I'm thinking the only reason this is happening is because the disease got into my brain. And even though I feel better, I'm dying and it's slowly killing me. So I lit out on a quest that has essentially spanned my life to figure out what the hell was happening to me. And what I very quickly figured out was that the exact same tool, and we can talk about why in a second, that helped me get from like really subpar back to normal was the exact same tool that was helping these athletes go from normal up to Superman and Superwoman. And it was the state of consciousness known as flow. Now, let me just get the health stuff out of the way because that's the thing that catches people's attention the most here. And I'm going to talk about 2 things. I'm going to talk about physical health and mental health really quickly. On the physical side, as the body transitions into flow, there's a release of nitric oxide. It's a gas, a signaling molecule sort of everywhere in your body. We've all had this experience. And what it does is it opens up your lungs and it pushes stress hormones out of your system. So if you go to the gym, right, and you sort of get a little bit of a flow state, right, like 20 minutes into your workouts, and your head's clear, it's quiet upstairs, your lungs are open, that's nitric oxide. As we enter flow, you get a bigger version of that, and it basically flushes all the stress hormones out of your system. So Lyme disease is an autoimmune condition. An autoimmune condition is a nervous system gone haywire. And one of the biggest problems is it can't get back to baseline. It doesn't know where normal is. We're homeostatic systems, but you bounce all over the place. You don't know where normal is. So by resetting the nervous system to zero, you can actually retrain the brain where normal is. On top of that, it's a bunch of neurochemistry that underpins flow. All of it actually boosts the immune system. On top of that, two of the most powerful experiences that come from flow are feelings of mastery and control. These are really our two favorite emotions as humans. We love feelings of mastery and control because it means survival to us. And as a result, when we get powerful emotions, and these are the most powerful emotions you can get, what it does is ups the production of T cells. So those are the immune cells that fight off disease, and killer T cells, which are the things that target tumors. This is why flow matters so much for peak performance, aging, and health and wellness and that sort of stuff. In fact, these effects are so powerful that Herbert Benson, who is a Harvard cardiologist who mapped the flow cycle and the neurobiology of it, said that he believes in his book, The Breakout Principle, that flow and what I'm talking about is the cause for most of the cases of spontaneous healing. So, and there's a bunch of other neuroimmunology about this. So let's just park that there. Now let's talk about emotionally what happened to me, because this is really cool and this is really cutting edge research that I want to tell you about. And it came out last week in Nature Translational Psychology. So the top psychiatry journal in the world.
Cool.
Gold standard research, a team led by great researchers in Europe, colleagues of ours, but distant colleagues of ours. They took an enormous, so we've known since the 50s and 60s that flow amplifies well-being, mood, overall life satisfaction. There's studies that show the people who score off the charts for overall life satisfaction, they've got the most flow in their lives. There's all these happiness. There's 3 tiers of happiness. 2 of the definitions, the upper 2 tiers have flow baked into the definition. I go on and on and on about the positive impact on mental health. But what nobody's ever managed to do is prove the inverse. Like I just told you that flow pushes these stress hormones out of our system and it lowers anxiety. If those things are true, right, we should be able to prove stuff like that. Nobody's been able to do it. And it's just hard research to do. And they had a brilliant insight. They took an enormous twinned sample, 10,000 twins. And they looked at them for flow proneness, which is our ability to regularly get into flow, which is a trainable skill. And I have to toot my own horn here because it's just really cool. And I've never seen it in a science journal in my entire life. In this journal, these researchers we don't actually know very well said that the Flow Research Collective is the only company in the world training people in flow, which was wild because I've never seen the name of a business or a company in a scientific journal before. I've never seen it. We were so shocked. It was really incredibly kind of them to do it. And I was deeply honored by it, but I was like totally freaked out. I was like, did they just name my company? What? I'm reading this research and I'm like, wait, that's my, right. Anyways, besides the point, what they found is that flow proneness, the ability to get into flow regularly, which is just pointed out as a trainable skill, is protective against, check this out, depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and cardiac-related stress conditions. Now, if you put that on top of work that we did a couple of years ago that was published in Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews, where we showed that flow is protective against PTSD and can be used to heal PTSD, and work by a woman named Karina Pfeiffer, who's a brilliant researcher and one of the founding members of the European Flow Researchers Association, did a study where she found that flow is neuroprotective against burnout. So I have just listed all of our largest mental health conditions. If you add them together and the cost to society, it's between 800 and 900 billion dollars a year in America. That's just America, a year that we spend on these conditions. Flow is preventative against no other treatment, or like nothing does that, but that's what our biology does. That's what it means to get your biology working for you rather than against you. That's what when you say optimal performance and you're talking about mental, emotional, and physical, or we talked about some of the physical stuff, what happens to your body. And we're just in the middle of a colossal mental health crisis and nobody knows where to turn. And the evidence is, again and again and again and again. Even I'll give you the craziest example. They did a study in China. They wanted to know post-COVID who was languishing, who could not get back on their feet, who was sort of basically burned out, but nobody was at work. So it's not a work-related burnout. They call it languishing. And who was flourishing and what and why. And they looked at a whole bunch of factors in a bunch of populations, and the study was repeated a couple times. There was one factor that mattered: the amount of flow you got in during COVID. People who got into flow regularly, who were flow prone, were flourishing after COVID. People who didn't were languishing. So that was, whatever it did for my body, what it did for my mind was sort of the most sort of amazing thing. And obviously, West of Jesus, it also gave me my career, because this is where all the science came in. I called Dr. Andrew Newberg, who was a neuroscientist at the University of Pennsylvania, who had just done the first brain imaging work on Tibetan Buddhists and Franciscan nuns who experienced unity, oneness with everything. Very common experience in Tibetan Buddhism. In Christian mysticism, it's often called unio mystico, oneness with Jesus' love. And Andy put people who were experiencing this into a SPECT scanner, like an early fMRI version, and looked at their brains, and he figured out why this happens. And we can go there if you want, but I'll spare you the details. But that was what was happening to me. I was becoming one with the ocean while I was having these weird mystical experiences. And other surfers had said similar things to me. Laird Hamilton, for example, used to talk about, and I used to think, like, in interviews, like I remember interviewing Laird the first time I met him for ESPN and thinking, this guy sounds like a flaky hippie lunatic. I'm becoming one with the ocean. Like it was literally, and today I'm having the same experience. And Andy figured out why it happened in nuns and Buddhists. And I called him up and I was like, hey man, I know this is going to sound weird. I know you don't know me, but I'm studying action sport athletes, and this population has experiences of oneness with everything. I think their flow is causing them. Am I looking at the same thing? Could it possibly? And he said, much to his generosity and credit, he said, I have no idea, but let's find out. And that was where my neurobiology career began, with Andy Newberg as my mentor, trying to figure out, and that's the story essentially told in West of Jesus, from the moment, I get sick, through the moment I take a very wayward path towards this discovery in West of Jesus, because I had no idea what I was doing. Right. I thought I was tracking down spiritual experiences. I didn't think I was tracking down a biology. Right. I thought I was on the trail of what the hell do we mean by mystical experiences? But anyways, that's the story of West of Jesus.
I love that. First of all, congratulations on getting the Flow Research Institute quoted in that academic scientific journal. Huge. And I want to just underscore what Stephen just shared, at least one piece of it. And that is, there he was feeling seriously suicidal. He had pretty much bankrupted himself.
No girl, no job, no house.
He could barely function. No girl, the love, leaves him, because that's what happens when you're in bed for 2 years. All that shit that happened to him. And the serendipity of having his dear friend by the name of Andrea pull him out of his apartment and get him onto a board and get back into surfing after 5+ years is what set him on this journey to understand what was happening to him, this feeling of oneness, which has basically been his career ever since. You think that creative writing major had any inkling that that's what was awaiting him? I'll let you answer it. Now for the hack, Stephen. What are some basic tips, tools, whatever, that you can share with our audience to help them get into flow, and then maybe refer them?
Your audience is mostly students, right?
Yeah, students, parents, all that. Yeah.
If you want more flow, you asked a hacking question. What do you need to know? There's a couple things. I'll start with the fact that flow states have triggers. These are preconditions that lead to more flow. There are about 28 that have been discovered. There's two versions of flow. There's individual flow, me in a flow state, or there's group flow. This is like me and you in a great conversation. We lose track of time. That's known as interpersonal flow. It's two people. It's a team performing their best. But you can go all the way up to any scale. If you go to like a rock concert and there's 100,000 people in the audience, you all merge with the music and you're clapping and sync and brain and dream and whatever. That's communitas. It's group flow at the largest scale. So individual flow, group flow, there's like 12 triggers that we know of for individual flow at this point now, 12 to 14, and another 16 or so for group flow. There's probably way more, but that's where the research is right now. They all share the same thing in common, and this is sort of baseline flow hacking. Flow follows focus. It's a state of total attention on the task at hand. All the triggers do the same thing. They drive our attention into the current moment. They do it a bunch of different ways neurobiologically, but they drive our attention into the current moment. This brings me back to, I'm going to talk about one of the most important triggers, and then I'm going to talk about procrastination. So the golden rule of flow is known as the challenge skills balance. This is the idea that we pay the most attention to the task at hand when the challenge slightly exceeds our skill set. So you want to stretch but not snap. If I were to put a number on it, I actually didn't put a number on it, but Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the godfather of flow psychology, sat down with a Google mathematician and they put up back of the envelope calculation together. They think it's a 4% difference, meaning we pay the most attention to the task at hand when the challenge is about 4% greater than our skill set. Now, that's a little tricky. And by the way, we took that number and tried to bang on it and studied it for years. It's impossible to test. So what I will tell you is I think it's the most deadly accurate metaphor in the universe, but I can't tell you it's a fact. It's just a metaphor, but it's really good to steer from if you're shy, if you're meek, if you're timid, or if you're facing like a challenge that you're nervous about, right? 4% means you're going to be just outside your comfort zone. You're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to be a little overwhelmed, but you're not going to be like flooded with anxiety. Now, if you are a hard charging type 8 personality, you see this a lot when we work a lot with entrepreneurs. Our entrepreneurs, they blow past 4% because like you can't even wake them up unless the challenge is like 30%, 40% greater than their skills. And the problem is you've just like by creating a challenge that big, and there's actually a bunch of good reasons to do that, but it's terrible for flow. So you have to chunk it down. So the thing that you're doing right here, right now is 4% greater than your skills. Like you can have a massive goal, but the thing that you're doing today is 4% greater. So let me just give a simple example of what that looks like in my own life so people can just wrap their head around it. I write books. When I start a book, I don't know what I'm doing. So I try to write about 500 words a day. In the middle of a book, I have a better idea what I'm doing. It's about 800 words a day. And at the end of the book, it's 1,000 to 1,200 words a day. That's roughly 4%. Now, I can write about 350 words in something, usually 300 words, sort of easily. It's really simple, but at like around 300 to 400, you've got to transition between ideas. And anybody who's ever written an essay for school knows that's hard. How do you go from one idea to the next cleanly and fluidly? So that's the 4% for me. Like it could be going along smoothly and I'm going to get stuck there for an hour. How do I bridge this gap? How do I lead the reader to this new idea? That's why 500 words. So my point here is it's a moving target. And it's going to change every day. It's going to change based on your energy level, how you feel, and whatever. But if you want to maximize flow, attack anything you do by trying to push it a little bit outside your comfort zone, 4% greater than your comfort zone. And break it into chunks if it's bigger than that. Now, let me come back to procrastination. Let me come back to a couple of things about peak performance that are really useful, I think, for everyone to know. The first thing is people have lied to you and your emotions don't mean what you think they mean. And procrastination is a fabulous example. When we procrastinate, we beat ourselves up. We feel less than, we feel worthless. We feel like we're doing something wrong. In fact, the body actually is built to perform in flow, to perform at your best. It will naturally move towards flow. So there's no peak performer in the world in any field who doesn't use flow at the center of what they do. Even if they don't know what they're doing, they've found ways to put their body into flow. They've naturally come to, I push on my skills a little bit and things like that. Procrastination doesn't mean what you think it means. When we procrastinate, it doesn't mean something is wrong with us. It means that the challenge skills balance is screwed up. If you are putting something off, and we are naturally geared towards flow, you're putting it off for one of two reasons. Either it's too freaking boring and you're not paying any attention to it. You can't focus on it. The challenge isn't great enough, right? If I talk about the challenge skills balance, it's like mostly I say it's between boredom, not any stimulation here, I don't give a damn, and anxiety. Whoa, way too much. In between is this golden rule. And for those who are total like biology geeks, if you study physiology, this is the same thing as the Erbs-Dobson curve. Procrastination means, hey, this thing that you're trying to do, it's boring. You can't master your focus. So what do? You put it off till it's due the night before. You create some artificial time stress. So what happens to you the night before? You drop into the zone. You write all night on instant paper.
I can try now, and then you can jump in, Stephen, and correct me. But I'm just thinking like top line. If we're going to give sort of a distilled how to get into flow in 3 or so easy steps for our audience.
I'll aim it at students, though I actually think the same thing is true at work. So 1, flow demands complete concentration. So what does that mean neurobiologically? What does that mean brain-wise? Well, 1, it means you got to practice distraction management. If you're going to study, if you're going to do core work, you want to generate flow, you got to wall yourself off from the outside world, right? You need complete concentration. So we're not more powerful than our devices, right? So turned off your phone, email, messages, anything that can disturb you. I like to write really early in the morning, and I usually I leave my devices back at my house and I don't take them to my office with me first thing in the morning. And I set my computer up the night before. I turn email off. All my messages are off. I have my focus view on my book that I'm working on. So I keep the lights off. All I see are the words, and that's it. That helps me really concentrate. How long should you try to concentrate for? Interesting question here. So it turns out, everybody knows you go into REM sleep and you dream for like 90-minute cycles. Turns out there's an inverted waking focus cycle that's 90 minutes long. So your brain is biologically designed to focus on a single task for 90 to 120 minutes. And that sounds really crazy because most people these days don't ever try to focus on a single task. We multitask, we do a whole bunch of stuff, but we can't multitask. The brain doesn't do it. It's counterproductive. And when you actually wall yourself off, and don't start, 90 minutes sounds daunting. Start with 10 minutes, 20 minutes. McKinsey did a study of top executives in flow, and they found they report being 500% more productive than out of flow. So imagine if you spent a half an hour in flow, what you can actually get done.
Got it.
So distraction management, 90-minute blocks is what you want to work up to, but flow will buy you time back because it makes you more productive. So start there. Right, with distraction management. The next thing is when you attack whatever it is you're doing, attack it 4% greater than your skills, right? That's where you want to push on you're doing. Maybe that's creating a time limit for yourself. Maybe that's setting a word count limit like I do with writing or so that. Figure out a way what that is. And it's going to change task by task and day to day, but that's the second thing. The third thing that I want to talk about is immediate feedback. So flow follows focus. We pay the most attention to the task at hand when we get really immediate feedback. So this is why sports produce flow so much, because like the tennis ball, it either goes in or it hits the net, right? It's either in or it's out. That's immediate feedback. Surgeons talk a ton about flow, and surgical teams in flow. Why? There's immediate feedback. Right? You screw up the surgery, the patient dies on the table. That is immediate feedback among many other things. So sometimes we don't get the feedback we want. Like in school, you don't get that feedback till you take a test or turn a paper in, and that may be too late. So with writing, I work with editors who only want to see my stuff twice a book. Right at the end, but it's done, and there's a couple edits in, and that doesn't work for me. So I have a guy on my staff. He's been with me for 25 years, 30 years at this point. Same guy, and he reads everything I write twice a week. So I literally pay a guy to read my stuff walk me through it a little bit and tell me mostly, is it boring? Is it arrogant? Or is it confusing? That's what I call my minimal feedback for flow. So we're all going to have those things, and you got to experiment a little bit over time. What's good feedback? This is sort of a voyage of self-discovery, right? I'm inviting you to go on a voyage of self-discovery. Figure out what you mean by complete concentration. Figure out what you mean by 4% greater in the challenge skills balance, and figure out what you mean by immediate feedback. It's going to differ for different things, right? When I'm skiing, I've got a different 4% than when I'm writing, versus something I'm terrible at, bowling, right? Those are totally different 4% and whatever. That's going to be everybody's experience. But literally, I think those three things, this stuff is really trainable. So at the Flow Research Collective, we have a standard flow training, the one that was mentioned in that article we mentioned, 0 to Dangerous. It's 8 weeks long. Go through with a PhD psychologist as a coach. And it's pretty rigorous, I will say that. But we see on average a 70 to 80% boost in flow. We data grab every 1,000 or so, or every couple thousand people who go through, we data grab. The last time I data grabbed was a couple months ago, and it was 3 months worth of data on like 800 clients. We saw a 71.2% increase in flow. So this is a very hours. It's actually not in flow, an hour spent in flow per day. This is a very trainable skill. And by the way, directly in line with the mental health stuff, at the same time we see flow go up in all of our clients, we see stress being reduced by 24% on average. So flow goes up, stress goes down. Same thing I was talking about earlier. We see it all the time with our clients. It's in our data. The last thing I want to say is there's a bunch of flow triggers, and people who start studying this stuff, so we get a little bit overwhelmed. They're like, oh, there's all of these things I have to do all day long. Let me talk about the power of just a couple of flow triggers, and I'll give you a business example because it's maybe the most glaring example you can think of. So Toyota in the 1980s, when I was in high school, they were just another car company. They didn't make very good cars. Nobody really respected them a ton. People had crappy Toyotas. Right. By the end of the 90s, they were the number one car company in the world with really exotic luxury brands, vehicles. Everybody loved them. So what the hell happened in between? They adopted a new management philosophy based on basic flow principles. The philosophy is globally famous at this point in business. It's known as Kaizen, or continuous improvement. It leverages 2 flow triggers. One is the challenge skills balance, and the second one is autonomy. So we pay more attention to where the car is going when we're driving the car. That's just like autonomy. So in the brain, autonomy, the ability to direct your own actions, is literally coupled to attention. So if you don't want to do something, you literally will not be able to pay maximum focus to the thing you're doing. So when you have that autonomy, it really amplifies focus, amplifies flow. Toyota Kaizen said, look, you work at Toyota. Let's say you do one of the worst jobs we have. You put hubcaps on tires. That's your job. You work on the line, you put hubcaps on tires, and that's what you do all day long. No. That's no longer your job. Your job is to make Toyota as a company better. Your job is to improve the hubcap online process. Everything that's going on, everything you do all day, you have to make it better. Continuous improvement is the goal. 1% better a day, 4% better a day, whatever it is. They gave employees these 2 flow triggers, and then they gave them the space to really utilize them. A little bit of autonomy, right? We're all in it together. Like, you're here to help the company too. And they turned up the challenge level. No longer were they just assembly line workers doing this all day. They were assembly line workers trying to find a better way to do that and run the whole system. And that was all it took. So a company starts leveraging 2 flow triggers, and that's where it goes in about 10 years' time. I mean, they tell it as this crazy, amazing business story. And it's really a story about like what happens when you get our biology working for us rather than against us, and what's actually in all of us. Toyota is just emblematic of one example. Those action sport athletes doing the impossible was another.
I'm hoping I can squeeze in 3 quick questions here. The first one is going to be the longest one, and it has to do with intuition, because as we're doing this interview right in the peak of graduation season in early June of 2024, And there's an overwhelming level of anxiety among students that they pick the right first career, the right first job. And a lot of that is directed outside of themselves, right? What are their friends doing? What are their parents doing? What do they think would sound impressive to other people, as opposed to tuning in to themselves, to their intuition? What role do you see intuition tuning into that voice, that gut feeling that is pulling us in a particular direction? What role does intuition have with getting into flow?
The first thing to know is there's a lot of studies that show the only time you really want to be wary of your intuition, like when should you maybe not trust your intuition? When it involves really basic needs. So when we are sort of hungry, intuitions about we do this all the time. We have intuitions about how much we think we should eat in order, and we massively over order, right? Or we do it, sex is another one. And this is, you ever anybody who's been to college is going to recognize this one. We get an intuition that the boy or the girl or the man or the woman across the bar is really hot for us. I mean, and you walk over there and they don't even want to meet you, kind of thing, right? So it seems like when basic desires like sex, food, money can also be a little bit like that because it takes care of a lot of security needs. You want to sort of be a little bit wary of your intuition in those situations. That's a time to start of say, okay, if my intuition tells me this, logical analysis tells me this, and go that extra step when it comes to that, because it does. It seems like you can train yourself over time to be able to trust your intuition in situations like, for example, we've been privileged enough to get to work with a bunch of different members of the military, including Navy SEALs. And these guys are in survival situations all the time with really basic needs. And they have great intuition. And so you can train it up, but without the training, we're not great. Okay. So that's half of it. First of all, in flow, one of the coolest things that happens, and I write about this in Rise of Superman. I actually think I write a little bit about it. West of Jesus, the book that you're currently reading, is our intuition gets tuned up. It's louder. It's clear. It's because flow calms down that voice in their head. It gets really quiet. The default mode network turns off in flow. And so the voice in our head gets really, really quiet. And as a result, we can hear our intuition more. Now, here's a cool thing. One of the best ways to get better at intuition is interoception. Pay attention to your body's internal signals. So interoception is our ability to feel that gut instinct you were talking about. The standard way to train interoception, the standard test of it, is heartbeats. Can you count your heartbeats? Now, here's something really interesting, and this is where it gets cool and practical. Studies run, they did this study with London stock traders. So they found that London stock traders who could more accurately count their heartbeats up to a minute, that's the standard test of interoception. Can you count your own heartbeats up to a minute without putting your hand on your chest? Can you just feel it in your body and count? People who have better interoception have significantly better pattern recognition skills. Pattern recognition is literally at the foundation of creativity and learning and problem solving. It's what brains do. And they can use heartbeats per minute and the stock trader's ability to count their heartbeats to predict with deadly accuracy who will do better in the market and how long they will last in the market. And interoception, which is the heart of like being able to, I've got a gut sense and being able to tune into it and really work with it. And we can all literally train ourselves to sort of count our heartbeats. A little bit of mindfulness exercise and breath work sort of helps there. But obviously study after study after study shows the same thing. Experts are the people who really should trust their intuition, right? If you're not an expert in the field, you should be a little bit wary. But if you have that, if you actually have skills mastery, trust your intuition, you get better results. I also want to say one other thing because I want to speak to the anxiety
Love it.
that you
Yeah.
started this with as a final thing I want to say,
Mm.
because we deal with this a lot at the collective,
Mhm.
not with students, sometimes with students, but usually with executives, because we have them set high, hard goals. These are these giant goals that I told you not to set, but to chunk down. So you want a daily to-do list, what we call a clear goals list. That's your 4%. You
Mhm.
also want to set those high, hard goals, multi-year goals. And one, they're great for motivation. There's studies out of motivational science shows that when you set a high, hard goal, it will give you a 25% boost in motivation. So that's cool. 25% boost in motivation. That's huge. So you want to do that. And so we train people to set higher goals. And something we hear all the time. In fact, I was just trying to I meet my coaches once a month that like, what are our clients dealing with? And we were just talking about this. People are really freaked out that they're going to set the wrong higher goal and spend a couple years wasting their time. And here's the thing that I've learned. And I think this is really true and it's really worth knowing. And it's not going to help you. And you're not going to believe me until much later. But I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to students. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what your first job is. It doesn't matter what kind of high hard goal you set. The point that matters is that you attack it with curiosity and learn. One of the things I found, and one of the questions that I've really asked a lot, because I study peak performance. And if you really want to study peak performance, you're not actually interested in people who rise to the top. You're interested in people who rise to this top and stay there for a long career, right? It's one thing to get to the top of your field. It's a totally different thing to stay there for 30 to 40 to 50 years. It's almost impossible to do with companies. It's really difficult for individuals to do. And extraordinarily difficult for anybody who's doing anything creative. And as a guy who writes for a living, I really cared about this. So I spent a lot of time asking, who has the longest careers and what happens. And one of the stories you hear over and over and over again, and this has certainly been my experience, nothing is ever wasted. There's skills that I learned doing stupid jobs I had in high school that I thought I would never use again and whatever, but I went into these things and I learned them and I learned the skills. And suddenly when you're 45 years old, those skills are going to save your ass in a work crisis. I've never learned anything over time that is wasted. And more than anything else, it is really difficult. So you can't identify what you really want to do is you want to look for a place where your strengths intersect your values, intersect the experiences that produce the most flow. These are the people who are the happiest for long careers. And you have to do a bunch of stuff to figure out what are your strengths, what are your values, what produces the most flow. There is no wrong turn. The wrong turn happens when you didn't dive in, give it everything you got, put yourself into flow to maximize learning rates while you were there, and get to, oh, wow, this is the wrong path for me, maybe a little bit faster, but with those skills. That's what really matters. You shouldn't be worried about what is my first job, how's it going to hit my career. You're going to have so many jobs along the way. That's not a real question. The real question is, what am I going to bring to that job that's going to make sure I become the person I need to be to get where I want to go?
Stephen, I love that. I have two final questions, but before I get to them, and those questions are super quick, I just have to say 1,000% yes. When I went to college, I studied political science, Asian studies, and Mandarin Chinese because I wanted to be an American diplomat. I sat for the Foreign Service exam my senior year and I failed it. I failed it. I didn't know you're supposed to study.
It's a really hard exam.
Okay.
It's a really hard
Super
exam. Most people
hard.
fail.
Thank
Most
you.
people fail. I
Thank
just want
you.
you to know, most people have to take it 2 or 3 times until they pass.
Okay.
You're not alone.
I
You're not alone.
didn't know you could retake it, but it's a blessing. I fast forward 13 years. I'm a journalist and I am promoted to be CNN State Department correspondent. So I never became a diplomat, but I was a journalist who was reporting on the diplomats and American Diplomacy. So you can never predict how those skills, how those subjects that you study in college or whatever are gonna pay off down the line. Two final questions. What can our listeners and viewers do right now, Stephen, to become more magical, to experience more serendipity in their lives the way that you have?
Okay, this is a biased answer, but I'm also working on synchronicity, which is related to intuition. And it turns out that a lot of what we mean by synchronicity and luck, there may be some magic in here, but a lot of it seems is the experience of flow over time. And it has to do with what flow massively amplifies pattern recognition in the brain. Synchronicity is noticing meaningful patterns with non-causal connections, right? And pattern recognition goes up in flow massively because the dopamine and norepinephrine tune the brain signal to noise ratios. We actually have more experiences of synchronicity and flow. So honest to God, the answer, it's very self-serving, but you have it as the question. And I'm working on this and it's fairly well established. We're starting to actually understand a little bit, at least psychologically, a little bit neurobiologically, what we mean by that. I don't necessarily think it explains away all the magic. I've certainly, I talk about in West of Jesus. That was the first time. I don't know if you're there yet, but I write about synchronicity in West of Jesus because it was the beginning of the puzzle. The answer to your question, I think, is actually more flow over time. So the same triggers I talked about are going to work to sort of increase synchronicity if I'm right.
Love it. Okay. So looking back on your incredible career so far, what do you think has been the secret to the magic, to the synchronicities and the serendipities that you've attracted and experienced over the course of your career thus far?
That's incredibly hard thing to say. Honestly, this is something, the answer is not, it's not really sexy, but peak performance is a checklist. It's like 6 things you want to do every day, like have a 90-minute block of uninterrupted concentration, thinking about 6 or 7 things you want to do every week. And, the answer to that, and peak performance works like compound interest. So like it grows, it gets bigger over time. And all the mental stuff that I've accomplished because I showed up every morning and I just did the stuff on the checklist. I get asked a lot, how did you write 14 books? How do you run this company, etc., all that stuff. And the only answer I've got is that I don't take a day off and I just get up every day and I write 500 words. And, somehow I've written 14 books and a lot of magazine articles, and that sort of stuff and a bunch of scientific research. And that's really the answer. It's literally just showing up every day and being consistent at these really small things every day over a very long period of time because it's compound interest. So I talk about it in The Art of Impossible as developing the habit of ferocity. And the habit of ferocity is just like the ability to sort of like instantly lean into challenges. And I say that the way you've won, that you've actually developed the habit is like you look back on your life after 6 months and you start thinking about what you've actually accomplished and you can't believe how long the list is. That's what actually starts to happen over time once you start like hitting the checklist every day and and you just got to sort of park your emotions. Your emotions don't matter. These are the things that matter. And flow is at the center of everything on the checklist because it's peak performance. So like that's the tool you're aiming for. And that's how I think about it. There's a very short, not a very good answer. It's a good answer, but it's not very eloquent. If you want the eloquent, slower version, Art of Impossible is probably what you want to read.
I was going to say, I'm obviously not Stephen Kotler and don't know you well. But just from what I've observed from the books that you've written, and especially West of Jesus that I'm reading right now, I would have said that you followed your curiosity and you did things you enjoyed. You surfed, you ski, you like do all this stuff, which it's fun to you and it's relevant to the writing that you've done and to the stories you've told and to the research that you have produced. So that would have just been from my 10,000 foot perspective.
But I did follow my curiosity, but I followed it in a very sort of methodical. I did the same thing every day for, 30 years in a sense. All of it was massively exploratory because that's how curiosity is amazing. You get focus for free, right? You can't beat it. And I find a way to be curious about
Exactly.
everything I do. So you're very right, but to me,
Exactly.
it's sort of linked to the checklist. It's part of this. It's part of the same program, I think. But you make a fair point.
And I'm guessing you have had one hell of a diary of journals over the years, because the level of detail in your writing is extraordinary. It really is. I want to recommend to our audience to listen to the Flow Research Collective. Check out Stephen's books. They are amazing. It's like the elevator to the top floor in your professional and personal life. The link to all of the above are in show notes. Stephen, I want to thank you so much, and I want to wish you many, many more magical moments to come.
Thank you. You too.
Let's go.
Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of This Magic Life. Our mission is to inspire you to stop fearing your future and start getting excited about all the serendipitous and magical opportunities that await you. Make sure to subscribe to This Magic Life on YouTube so you don't miss any new episodes. And for on-the-go listening, give us a follow wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. We absolutely love to get feedback from the This Magic Life community, so make sure to drop us a comment on YouTube or a 5-star review on Apple. And you can always find me on LinkedIn at Andrea Koppel, aka the Career Magic Maker. I can't wait to see you soon.